Hello Year 11, it's Mr. Merrick here, and welcome to this walkthrough mock video which will explain the upcoming mock examinations for English Literature in December of this year. Basically the whole point of this video is to go through some tasks that you can do at home this week, which will help you with the upcoming mock examination on the Macbeth sections and the Inspector Calls questions. The plan is, or what we expect you to do, I should say, is complete these tasks at home, have a go at the questions that I provide for you, email them, hand them to your teacher, and they'll be able to give you more guidance and feedback so that you have every chance to be successful at these mocks, okay, particularly obviously in this case, English Literature mock. So, I'm going to show you the paper now. This is what it will look like. And part of this paper means that it's split into two sections. There's a Shakespeare section and a post-1914 literature section, which is the Inspector Calls section. Now, with regards to this, I'm going to put some timings on the board. It's an hour 45 minutes, the whole examination is. So I'd expect those of you who don't have additional time, those with additional time might have to work out how they spend that extra bit of time on each section. But for those of you not extra time, it's 55 minutes on section A for the Macbeth questions. And there's two questions for Macbeth. And 25 minutes on the first question. About 20 minutes on the second question. These are just guidances, but roughly these things should be followed. And then when you go on to section B, the Inspector Calls question, you should be looking at sort of 50 minutes for that whole question because the amount of marks it entails. Now, because there are two questions, there's quite a lot to deal with regards to Macbeth. So if you do end up spending a little bit more time on the Macbeth question, it's not the end of the world, but do please be aware not to leave yourself 30 to 20 minutes on Inspector Calls. Do make sure you give yourself a good chunk of time to do that question, because like I said, it is worth half the marks on this paper. Okay, now feel free, by the way, I haven't said this yet, but do feel free to pause the video at any time. I do obviously move on quite often without warning. Use this video as best as you see fit. You don't have to just rush through it in the time given. You can take your time and pause it and make notes and do whatever you need to do to support yourselves with regards to revision using this video. So, the two questions will be on the paper like this, okay? Now, it's unlikely you'll have the full paper with all the different texts on there, but I do want to make sure that you know this for your actual examinations. Do only answer the questions on Macbeth and Inspector Calls. All the other texts aren't for you to do. You're only doing those two questions and two sections for that. Okay, so please don't try and answer questions on Romeo and Juliet, Journey's End for the other part. If you have studied those texts there, it is likely your teacher probably just wants you to do those ones. Okay, we don't stitch you up and just make you to have to do ones off the top of your head. There are many instances where actually this does happen, and obviously it means the student doesn't do as well as they should. So please do just make sure you answer Macbeth and Inspector Calls if you get given a full paper ever. Okay, something that seems so silly to say, but it does need to be said because there's always one or two students who get a little bit confused and flustered on the day and end up thinking they have to answer questions 1 to 22 in an hour 45. So yeah, do keep that in mind, please. So I'll have a look at section A first. Now, like I said with section A, the Shakespeare section actually involves two questions, as you can see here. Okay, you get an extract which will help you answer section 1A, and then you have to do 1B on the full play. Okay, and answer to show your knowledge of the whole play, and as well as that, the context as well. So, like I've already said, you need to make sure you complete both questions. Okay, you might decide to, in your actual mock, spend about 5 to 10 minutes annotating for 1A, so labeling up the extract with all the things that help you answer the question, sort of the quotations and the techniques you notice in there, and then maybe bullet point planning some ideas that you can talk about the whole play in regards to the theme they give you for 1B, and make sure you spend at least 20 minutes writing up that answer. I recommend at least 3 paragraphs on both questions this time. That means that this timing is quite tight. Okay, so do make sure you do spend your time in your mocks actually writing for the full duration of that 15 minutes for the section, because you really, really want to make sure that you are displaying as much knowledge as you possibly can in this time. Okay, so 50 minutes to 1 hour overall. Once you get to the 1 hour mark, if you're not into spectacles, then I really do encourage you to move on by that point, okay? Because you don't want to end up with a sort of imbalanced paper where you aren't really answering in as much detail as you possibly can for each of the questions. Now, I've provided, as part of your work on Teams, these questions here. Okay, a question on Lady Macbeth's instability and a section for that, and also then a question for 1B on the importance of power and power elsewhere in the play. Now, we'll show you some guidance of how you can prepare for this and how you can revise for this at home before you answer these. Okay. What's really important for you to know, guys, is I've purposely made these questions because they will help you with your mock. Okay, they bear some similarity. They're not exactly the questions you'll get in the mock. Okay, that would be a little bit too generous of us. Okay, so but completing these will therefore give you an advantage. Okay, so do make sure you give these a good go. They'll be great revision for that reason. So, how do I answer 1A? What's the success criteria? What must I include? What are the examiners looking for me to get higher marks? Here's the kind of things that I would recommend that you include. And first of all, most importantly, okay, you should be looking for, good quotations. 5 to 6 it says here, okay, and that can include, short quotations, single word analysis. Okay, like I said, I would recommend at least in about 20 minutes, 3 to 4 paragraphs, analyzing the character. Okay. Obviously, if not more, it depends how much you can do in the time, but do make sure you give yourself plenty of writing on that page to get yourself the mark sheet. So do make sure you've got a good range of quotations about the characters from the extract only. Mention some subject terminology. It says 4 pieces or more here. There might be an extract where there isn't quite that many, but do make sure you at least show off your knowledge of sort of techniques, sort of your metaphors, your similes, perhaps some adjectives, or if we're thinking Lady Macbeth, imperative verbs, bossy verbs that she uses when talking particularly to her husband. Those kind of techniques, mentioning those shows your knowledge of Shakespeare's language, so do mention those. And then try and write a lot about them, okay? You do want to say quite a lot about the effect of those techniques on the audience, potentially, what they show about the character, what Shakespeare is trying to show us about the character, and maybe their relationship with others too. Okay, but do try and say a lot about a little. So when you're thinking about your, I don't know, we refer to it as petal paragraphs. When it comes to the analysis, that bit needs to be the longest part. Okay, so you do need to make sure after your quotation you've mentioned your technique. Right, now is where I really need to say a lot about that quotation and what this shows. This shows this, or it could show this. Perhaps it also reflects this, and this might make the audience feel this about the character. Okay, that's where a lot of the marks lie in analysis and that explanation of the quotation. So I've provided you this extract on Lady Macbeth's instability for us to look at, and you might decide that you're better watching rather than reading the extract. Of course, you will have to read it in the exam, so some of you might be like, well, why would I want to watch a video version? But some of you like to obviously have that complement part of your revision. Feel free to look at and watch this YouTube version of the extract I've provided. What you'll need to do, okay, is as you watch or read, label any moments that you can link to instability, and any techniques you notice Lady Macbeth or the characters talking about Lady Macbeth in this section are using as well that you can comment upon. Obviously, the questions ask you how she's unstable in this part, so the more that link to that, even better. So what I'm going to do is on the next slide, I'll be showing you what I would have labelled. But I would recommend that you pause the video and have a go at this yourself first, having a look for any of those things that I just mentioned there. So here's that extract I've provided on Teams. Okay, so hopefully you're in some way able to highlight this, whether that be via computer or the fact that you've printed it off, or even just having jotted down the quotations that you would have selected from this. And that's what's really important when you first have an extract. You find the quotations you're going to be basing your essay paragraphs on. So here's the ones that I've selected from this. I've selected these because they are examples of showing Lady Macbeth as unstable on stage. They're also, in many ways, good examples of techniques used by Shakespeare as well. Okay, and once I've found my quotations like I have here, the next thing I need to do is just perhaps write down and remind myself of what techniques these are so that I can mention that in my essay paragraphs and get some higher marks too for question 1A. So as I've said, these are some techniques that I've noticed in this. Now, a lot of people get quite daunted by Shakespeare's use of language, but there are some easy techniques that are used quite regularly throughout the task and throughout the play that we can all identify, and things like exclamations are fantastic to talk about because it usually is where Shakespeare would be encouraging the people acting in his plays to shout a line, for example, to show, in this case, instability. It could be used to show anger, it could be used to show excitement and ecstasy at certain other times. Okay, so it's great to talk about or find an exclamation because it's something that usually can be interpreted pretty well, regardless of the complex or slightly older language used by Shakespeare in this. I've also would recommend as well, as you can see towards the bottom here, things like repetition are quite easy to identify and talk about, and nice easy techniques that appear regularly in Shakespeare's play too. Okay, obviously if you can find things like your sort of metaphors and similes and talk about that, those even better. Okay, so these are the techniques I found. Now some of you might decide or might prefer to jot down and bullet point some of the things that these quotations and these techniques with these quotations show about the character you have to write about, in this case, for example, Lady Macbeth. But that's completely really sort of up to you. Some of you might want to think, well, I'm tight for time, I'm going to crack on and write about it and write my explanations up without prior planning of them, because you want to just get this 20-minute question answered in as much detail as you possibly can. So that's completely sort of, I would recommend that that's completely up to you. So have a go at home, see if you prefer writing down what these show first before writing a lot more detail, or whether you rather just crack on with this. So what I would recommend you do at this point is have a go now at this sort of question. Okay, I've provided below here a sort of frame for you to look at, all right, which will, help those of you who do struggle to get started to write up your 3 to 4 paragraphs on this. Some of you might decide, actually, I don't need the frame, I prefer to write without one. And again, that's completely up to you. Do try and hit that success criteria. Make sure you are obviously using quotes, mentioning some techniques, and writing in pretty good detail for this. But that is pretty much it for question 1A. So 1B is slightly different. Obviously, you don't have an extract, which is the first thing that makes it, something you have to approach entirely differently. But you still need to make references in this text, okay, and in this question. So at this point, you do still need to potentially mention quotations that perhaps you've memorized, or if not quotations, at least references to something that might happen in the play, or paraphrase something a character says slightly to make a discussion on the sort of theme that you are being asked to look at. So themes are what this question kind of really does focus on. So things like power, the supernatural, death, you have to just talk about them in the whole of the play. You still need to talk about the sort of the effect of the audience and what's shown about the theme from the quotations and the references that you make. But the big difference with this question is that you do need to mention some context, some of the historical things that have occurred that are really influencing this text. Okay, so for example, Gunpowder Plot is something that's undoubtedly really kind of inspired Shakespeare to write this play. Okay, so those are the kind of things that you do need to mention as well. So it might be worth you revising the context of the play as part of your revision. Okay, now here's the question for today. So the question today is actually looking at and asking you to explain the importance of power elsewhere in the play, in the whole of the play. So you've got to think about, and it does give you these bullet points to help you, how power or lack of power is shown, because if you are talking, by the way, about the opposite of that, about how characters don't have much power, still technically talking about themes. So those of you who perhaps are lacking ideas or want to develop on their ideas or sound even cleverer, you might actually decide to look at a few areas where characters are powerful, but you might also want to look at some areas where the characters don't have any power in the question, like this. And also mentioning the reasons why the characters have this power or don't have this power as this example. So use those bullet points to help you shape your answer as well. Okay? And it does, and whenever you see this in any of the questions where it says you must refer to the context of the play in your answer, it basically is saying that you aren't going to hit very high marks at all if you don't try and at least grasp with some of the influences historically that made this text what it was. So do please make sure you mention those as well. So as I've already said, it's really important that you should plan your responses, maybe bullet points some ideas. I would definitely recommend that you do that now before you have a go at this response. Do have a think about where you see the theme of power, or kind of the opposite of the theme, the lack of power in the play now for me. Have a pause of the video, maybe give yourself 5 or 10 minutes to write down some ideas that you can explore throughout the play. And do try and cover potentially a range of characters. Okay, now I haven't provided any answers to this, so you might search into the next part of the video and think, well, where's Sir's answers for these ones? I haven't done it this time. I thought it's better for you to find them for yourselves as part of your revision. But you might decide, for example, to look at someone like King Duncan rather than just Macbeth and Lady Macbeth, because he's quite a fascinating character when it comes to things like power, because one could argue that he certainly does have power. He's the king, of course. But others might argue that he actually lacks power and the authority that we need from a king. So you could actually end up writing a paragraph or even 2 paragraphs on King Duncan if you have a lot to say about him. So do try and think about sort of a range of characters, a range of moments where this theme is explored. And that's the kind of thing I'd always suggest for this question. Don't just look at and do one character study. Do consider a sort of range of characters and a range of moments to show your full knowledge of the play and the theme that they are asking you to look at when it comes to the play as well. Now, once you've done that, and if you haven't already, pause the video here, because I am going to be moving on to actually ask you to write this response. Do have a go once again having a bit of a write of this. Okay, so I again recommend you looking at 3 or 4 paragraphs in the sort of 20 to 25 minutes that you should spend on this question. Okay, I've provided a frame here, which in this case might be quite useful once again. Some of you might once again decide I don't need the frame, I want to try it without it. That's completely up to you. It's just there to support you if you need it. Once again, have a go at this and prepare yourself to send this or at least hand this to your teacher, because then they can provide you even more valuable feedback on how to make improvements on this. Now, that is section A done. Okay, so you have 1A and 1B completely done and dusted. That's how the Macbeth questions look in the mock examination coming up. Okay, and they are similar, like I said, to the ones that will be provided for you and you'll be answering on the mock. Okay, so let's have a look now at the Inspector Calls. Now, the Inspector Calls is different in that you actually get a choice. You do not have to answer both questions. I think that's really important to say. Okay, so only please answer one of the questions. If you answer both, you'll only get marked on one anyway. Okay, and I have had students do that in the past, and they've written 2 short but pretty good essays, but I've only been able to mark them for 1, which is a real shame, because they've essentially lost a good 30 minutes of their exam time for that. Again, consider spending 10 minutes planning, bullet pointing your ideas, having to think about how you'd answer the question that you choose. Okay, and you do not get given an extract for this. I provided one for you on Microsoft Teams to give you some ideas for the questions today, but you do not get given one. So please, 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 when it comes to your exams, do not go in there thinking, oh, well, where's the extract? We had one with Sir on his Microsoft Teams video. The one that I provided today is only to support you. Okay, so you do not get given one there. Now, the question, you either have to answer a question on a character. Okay, so for example, this question here is question 7. is asking you how Sheila is important in the play, or a question on theme. So you actually get a choice between a character or a theme. Now, some of you will prefer to write a detailed analysis and discussion of the character. Some of you will prefer to write about a theme. I personally would recommend always doing a theme, because the theme allows you to discuss a range of characters rather than focusing on just one. Again, it allows you to display your knowledge more widely, quite easily. So that's still completely up to you, and do be aware as well, by the way, on this question there are spag marks as well, so do try to keep things nice and accurate for this question. Okay, just try your best to make sure it's nice and clear and well written, so that you can get as many marks as you possibly can for that. Okay, so the success criteria is much the same for this one as the Macbeth question, as you'll see in just a second. Now, these are the questions I provided for you today. Okay, so you've got a question on Mrs. Burling, you've got a question on the significance of the generation gap. Now, it might be you decide, actually, I'll have a go at both of these at home and see which one I prefer writing. That'd be brilliant. I'm going to be making using the second question, the generation gap question, as part of my discussion today, because basically, like I said, I prefer the theme question. I think most of you should lean towards the theme question because it allows you to answer far more. So, like I said, it's very similar to question 1B. This is just a longer version of the Macbeth theme question. Okay, yeah, rather than you having just 20 minutes, you should be spending about 40 to 45 minutes writing up your ideas for this. So you might have 6 references. You might actually end up having more and end up writing sort of 6 or 7 paragraphs in this time given on the play about the theme. Okay. Again, you still need to talk about the effect on the audience, what the quotation's showing, write about the Jamie Priestley's intention when it comes to this. And once again, we are expecting to see, and it does say this, you must make references to context, okay, for you to get higher marks, okay? Things such as the Titanic, the World Wars. If you haven't already, check out the YouTube video I've made on context for Inspectacles, and it'll give you 10 really good examples of context that you can talk about and discuss with regards to this play. So do be aware then, the questions that I've provided today on Mrs. Burling and on the generation gap might be worth you having a visit to Planet eStream as well, and actually looking at the Inspectacles film version that's on there, particularly the newer one, because it will give you lots and lots of ideas for you to prepare for this response and write this response at home, and also be great revision for your actual mock examination too. Okay, as was the case with the Macbeth question 1B, the theme question, I would recommend that you have a little bit of a go now of bullet pointing some ideas. I know it's only got 1, 2, 3, 4. You could go up to 6 or 7 different ideas you have about the generation gaps that you see within the play. Think about key quotations. Think about how characters from one generation treat the other characters from a different generation, why that might be. What kind of things and what kind of points can you make about the generation gap? Okay, have a bit of a go now. Okay, so if you haven't already paused the video, this is where I recommend you do that before I show you my ideas. I have given you ideas for this one. Alright, but here's some of the things that I could talk about for this question. Okay, so I could talk about Mr. Burling and how he treats Sheila, the younger character. Okay, and I could essentially do that throughout my response. Just pick an older character, think about how they treat a younger character. Pick a younger character and talk about how they treat an older character. Just so that I end up formulating a really wide response with lots and lots of ideas, not forgetting as well, of course, to mention my context, because that's so important. Okay, now, again, I've provided a frame for you. And again, I would expect you to have a bit of a go at this at home. So once again, I've provided you a frame. This frame keeps things nice and simple. Once again, you don't have to use it, as we've already said. Do have a little bit of a go. This should be a longer response than 1B. Okay, like I said, this one is worth 40 marks by itself. The other questions, the Macbeth questions, are shorter questions and are a smaller amount of marks as a result of that. So do please make sure you spend longer on this one. Alright, give yourself a good 40 minutes at least, if not longer, to just write up your ideas so that you have good chance to practice this for your examinations. Okay? And as that is it for this mock, guys. Okay, so we've gone through all the questions. We've looked at how we answer them differently. We've looked at the timings, the amount of paragraphs perhaps we should consider writing. Okay, obviously they're just a guidance though, so some of you might decide to write more, and that's absolutely fine. I think that's great. Well done if you had a go at these. Do feel free, like I said, please do contact your teachers if you've got any questions, if you want them to look at any of your work. They're expecting it. So there will be no shock to them, because the more feedback we can provide you before your mock examinations, obviously the better prepared you will be. The only thing left for me to say is best of luck with this, and if you haven't already, do please check out my YouTube channel. This isn't just shameless self-promotion. I think there is some great stuff on there for you to use as part of your revision. If you don't know already, it is Lit Lessons with GCS Memes. And there are some great resources on Macbeth and Inspector Calls which will serve you in good stead for this upcoming mock. Thank you very much for your time.